I thought about this film in Poland, in Warsaw. And I thought that the story of a woman possessed, not living in the reality of the communist times and regime and surroundings, but having a very strange affair, would be very well contrasted with what was going on in our Eastern European countries at that time.
In The Untamed, Amat Escalante explores the decadent relationship of a young Mexican woman who encounters a mysterious creature, capable of satisfying her to unforeseen levels. The entity supposedly came from space, and it has the ability to enhance desire. Years before, Lars von Trier delved into the consequences of grief in Antichrist. The film narrates the process of a couple who decide to confine themselves to a cabin deep in the woods. There, madness invades them, and the relationship cracks until it is destroyed. Chaos, as one of the characters mentions, reigns in that place. Shortly after, Luca Guadagnino took up Dario Argento's Suspiria and made a remake. The new version took an aesthetic turn, shifting from the oversaturated colors of giallo to a grayish proposal, typical of the era in which it was filmed. It explored the decadent German streets divided by the wall more than its predecessor, while delving into the psychology of its protagonist. The three films have one thing in common. They are inspired in one way or another by the masterpiece of a Polish director, Possession by Andrzej Zulawski.
I tried to find in my mind a place in which the circumstances of what I have thought for the film would be telling and moving and graphic. And I thought that Berlin, this divided city, which is not divided today, the wall crumbled, everything changed, but the human heart didn't, I think.
The filmmaker was born in the middle of World War II, a fact that would completely define his way of perceiving the world. Controversial, honest, and committed to his work, he studied film in France and later debuted with The Third Part of the Night, after being an assistant to another notable filmmaker, Andrzej Wajda. His separation from his wife inspired him to write a story about the breakdown of a romantic relationship, which, according to his own words, he sold with the following line: "My film is about a woman who has sex with an octopus." He obtained a limited budget with the premise that it would be filmed in English to reach a larger audience, and with that, they started production.
Apart from that, the story of Possession is the story of my life. This is the only film I've made in my lifetime, which is really autobiographic. It says something, and this is the reason I wrote it, about my personal problems as a man with a woman I dearly loved. It's a film about a breaking up. It's the film about the end of a relationship, of a marriage. And I'm a strong believer in couples, in marriages, in children.
Starting from that simple premise, Zulawski proposes a reading on two levels. The first level is the ordinary, the separation and the affair with Heinrich. The second is what he calls the mythical dimension, whose inspiration is fantasy, from which a mysterious, ineffable figure emerges: the creature. Based on that vision, the structure of the film is established, which precisely transitions from the real to the extraordinary. One of the first conventions that affects this reading is found in the color palette. Bruno Nuiten's cinematography goes from the domestic frigidity beautifully portrayed in blues and whites to Anna's lair, an apartment that stands out for the color yellow, a contrast that sets up two different universes, condensed in Berlin itself. Anna inhabits both spaces. The one with the blues refers to the imminent separation, and, as we will see later, to the imperfect version of the marriage. The yellow, according to Andrzej, represents hope, the future, the space where Anna is giving life to what will eventually be the perfect version of Mark, which emerges from that cocoon, which is the terrifying beast created by Carlo Rambaldi, responsible, among other things, for the alien in E.T. The two tonalities were not a proposal that came from the pre-production phase. In reality, it arose from the interaction that the director and photographer had when they encountered the locations. The second convention that arises from the struggle between the ordinary and the supernatural lies in the performances. Filmed in a non-linear manner, the intensity of the emotions posed by the script required detailed work with the actors. To play Helen and Anna, the filmmaker cast the already celebrated Isabelle Adjani, one of the most brilliant actresses of the decade. And for Mark, the Polish director looked for Sam Neill, a young actor he saw in a film during a screening at Cannes. Neill created cards that condensed the different emotional stages his character went through. This is how he solved the dilemma of emotional fragmentation. Ajani, on the contrary, acted from another perspective. She got into character as soon as the director indicated it. Furthermore, as is told in several interviews, she was capable of giving her all with little information. To this clash of attitudes, Zulawski added a couple of elements: the interaction with the set design and the bodily movement of his actors. For Andre, it was very important to represent the claustrophobia in the apartment, which more than a home was a cage for him, inside which the characters moved nervously, wishing to be free without being able to escape from that prison. That was his starting point for directing his performers. That was their state of consciousness, he commented. That is why several of his scenes are constructed, based on how the actors use their bodies to interact with the elements around them. Mark with the telephone, or starting a sequence shot by running his hand over the books on a shelf. The tension of the body is transferred to the objects and infects them with that nervousness. Let's think about that interview where Mark hires the services of a private investigator to spy on his wife. Zulawski sets up two postures: the stillness of the investigator versus the dynamism of Mark, who constantly moves in his chair. It is not the first time a director solves a performance using an element of the set design. There is the dazzling scene in The Godfather Part 2, directed by a great director of actors, Francis Ford Coppola, where the filmmaker chose two postures for his actors in such a way that from there he determined the course of the scene and the duel of powers between brothers. Michael Corleone questions his older brother, determined to uncover the betrayal. Fredo remains seated in a chair that prevents him from getting up. Coppola had trouble solving the scene. The chair gave him the answer. In Possession, just as in Coppola's masterpiece, objects are an extension. They mean or provoke emotion as much as the actors who interact with them. Furthermore, they establish a contrast, representing the narrative starting point of the protagonist. Mark is constantly reminded of his stiffness. Stiff is the word used to describe his posture. Anna, on the contrary, is graceful, light. She is the one who has separated from the cage to live in freedom, represented, as we mentioned before, with the color yellow. The body and its interaction with space reach their climax in the celebrated subway scene, the main image for which the film is remembered, and which, curiously, despite its intensity, had only one direction from the director to the actress. Imagine you are having sex with the air.
It's a voodoo thing. It's again, we were talking about it maybe in more theoretical terms. Here you have theory in practice, which means that if you go in a trance, she bangs her head against the wall. It doesn't hurt. She rolls. It doesn't hurt, because she's outside of herself. In the same time, she is an actress acting. It's a shaman thing.
In many ways and at the performance level, it is a dance, choreographic film, not only on the part of the performers, but also of the camera, which explored the possibilities offered by the relatively recent Steadicam. Both elements come together in the interaction between Mark and Heinrich. This character was not only a critique of Polish left-wing intellectuals, or what his director called the stupidest thing in the film. He is also the bridge between the rational and the irrational. He is a contrast to Mark, energetic, loose, attractive, and intelligent. On the ordinary level, he is the third person in the dispute. Although, as we will discover later, he is just another piece in the puzzle. Anna's true love is the creature. The power struggle between Mark and Heinrich changes throughout the film. First, it is the lover who humiliates the husband. Then, in another claustrophobic choreography, it is Mark who takes the lead, to the visible confusion of Heinrich. Finally, neither of the two possesses the power, which shifts to the creature. Mark assimilates it. Heinrich does not. That's why one dramatically evolves while the other perishes in a humiliating way. When Zulawski was asked about that decision, the Pole responded, "I hate him. That's how I kill someone I hate." Mark, on the contrary, decides to enter Anna's madness with the hope of reconnecting with her. That madness left the screen, spread, and invaded its protagonist. Isabella Gianni immersed herself so deeply in the role that she bore the consequences.
She committed suicide because she never wanted to see the dailies, so she really didn't know how do we look at her. And she committed suicide, but being Isabella Gianni, and you must understand that in Europe, Isabella Gianni is a diva. She's like, La Tebaldi, La Callas. She's a big thing. And she went to the bathroom and she cut her wrists with a G2 machine, which cuts you like 0.5 millimeter or whatever of skin and not much deeper. And that's her too. Because she said, in one interview, she said something which is, I think, quite French and intellectual, but profound. She said, this is psychological pornography.
Possession visually and narratively poses divisions, marital segmentation, but also political. The film opens with images of the wall. With an anti-communist stance, the director constantly captures the surveillance from the other side of the wall, the proximity of a space that for him represented danger. He also created a double for each character, or as he preferred to call them, idealized versions of his protagonists. Helen appears from the first act. She is innocent, dedicated, the mother Mark needs to raise little Bob. She is an angel. Anna is her opposite, the devil. However, it is Anna who gestates Mark's doppelganger. The creature slowly evolves until it reaches perfection. It is the husband she always wanted. Both versions coexist in the last scene. The only one who now does not fit is the son. However, perhaps the previous sequence where the imperfect versions are annihilated is more significant. Again, the director resorts to a visual element to represent the ascension to heaven. The staircase represents this evolution. The characters are in a hell from which they cannot escape, the apartment. As soon as they are close to ascending, they are murdered. But the monster, which now has its final form, manages to ascend. Originally, the film would have had another resolution where the perfect Mark would contemplate the East Berlin area from the rooftop, which for the director was the pessimistic part. The true hell. The doppelganger is not only an element of the characters, it is also an element of the region where the drama takes place.
I think we are divided into somebody who wants to be good and somebody who wants to be bad or who is bad. And the whole story of our lives is this struggle between the devil and the angel. We were not totally devils, we are not totally angels, but we fight. And in art, if cinema is an art, very often we use this image like a mirror to this divide between us. So in this film you have two girls, and they are the same girl in a way, and you have two men by the end. The one she fought, the one she thought repressed her and she didn't love anymore, and the thing she recreated by the end, and that's the man.
The ending unites the idealized versions of the couple. The perfect versions replace the imperfect ones. Helen breaks the fourth wall, and with a play of lights accompanied by the sound of explosions, a bombardment begins. That ending, totally unrelated to the film's narrative, condenses Zulawski's perspective of the world. Born in an armed conflict and openly pessimistic, the filmmaker was forceful about the destiny of humanity from that iconic shot. In his own words, "For me, everything began as an apocalypse, and I am convinced that everything will end as an apocalypse." Bob's choice to sink into the tub responds precisely to that vision. Not being a perfect version, he no longer belongs to that new universe created by Helen and the creature. The film premiered at Cannes with mixed reviews. Isabella Gianni won several awards for her performance. It found viewers thanks to its DVD release, who gave it the recognition it did not have at the time, in addition to being an intimate, personal work that allows for multiple interpretations. Without Possession, the not-so-new current of art house horror and films like Hereditary or The Witch would not exist.